Benvenuti su Lupe, siamo qui con il nostro primo ospite, David Laskin, che ha scritto un racconto, o come lo chiameresti, un racconto oppure un personal essay intitolato L'ultimo giorno a Roma. David è autore di diversi libri, tra cui Children's Blizzard, che è stato pubblicato anche in Italia col titolo La tempesta dei bambini, da nell'editoria. Poi The Family, A Journey into the Heart of the 20th Century, e il suo libro più recente è un romanzo,
Sì,
che è il tuo primo romanzo, vero?
vero.
Walk Sammy Knew, che è del 2021.
Sì.
Allora David, ora procediamo, facciamo un'intervista in inglese, anche se tu parli benissimo in italiano, però. So, I was curious about your career. Why and how you decided to become a writer?
Okay. You know, Marco, I think I've always wanted to be a writer, but when I was younger, when I finished university, it seemed very presumptuous to say, now I'm a writer. And I also really didn't have a lot of knowledge of how to break in, how to form contacts. So I worked for a publishing company for about a year in the editorial department, and it quickly,
Which was
it was Bantam Books. Now it's part of Penguin Random House, which is still books.
so it was already a big publishing
It
house?
was a big publishing house, and it published mostly paperbacks, and it published what we call genre fiction, so westerns, romance, kind of trashy literature for the most part. But they also published a lot of good stuff. It was clear to me that I was not cut out for the editorial side of publishing. So a lot of it was being able to spot bestsellers, spot books that would be very popular. But I did make some good contacts there. A couple of the editors became friends. And I decided to, after about a year, to start freelancing. And so I wrote articles, mostly kind of what we call service pieces, things for parents. I was writing about raising kids. And the first book project that came my way was called the Esquire Wine Liquor Handbook. Esquire is a magazine in the U.S., a men's magazine, with sort of fashion.
Yeah, I guess that we had the version.
Yeah, I think there is a version of Esquire. And briefly, Esquire magazine wanted to open up a book division. And so the book they asked me to write, the Esquire Book of Wine and Liquor, was, that's exactly what it sounds like. It was kind of a guide to drinking responsibly. They have this sort of,
Not about drinking responsibly.
well, maybe responsibly is the wrong word. Drinking knowledgeably.
Okay.
And in this period, this was back in the 70s or maybe early 80s, wine was much less popular in the U.S. than it is now. What we call artisanal beer, craft beer, is just beginning. So some of it was about that. Some of it had recipes. And I was not, I would say, extremely well suited for that kind of book. But I did enjoy working on it, and it led to other books. So, as I said, some of the earliest books I wrote were about raising kids. I have 3 kids who are now grown up, but then they're young. But the first book that I wrote that was really my project, my idea, something that I felt passionate about, that I really wanted to bring all of my skills and knowledge to, is called Eastern Islands. And it's a travel book, in a way, about the islands on the east coast of the U.S. that can't drive to them because they're not bridged, but they have public ferries. They have public means of getting there. So anybody can get there to these islands that I wrote about, but you can't drive there. You have to take a ferry. And I really enjoyed that kind of book. And that led to what has continued to be part of my career, which is travel. And so I
write travel articles for the New York Times.
Correct. Yeah. So the travel writing that I did grew out of that book, Eastern Islands. And that was the period in which I first proposed travel pieces for the New York Times. And I've maintained that relationship now, probably for 30 years, maybe even more. And so I've written about, places on the East Coast, of the islands, Maine that I went to up in the north. But eventually my interest as a journalist and as a travel writer began to shift overseas, particularly to Italy. And at some point I began studying Italian. Now I'm able to do interviews in Italian, and then so my interest shifted to Italy and then shifted to
Which year was it? You remember?
I'm guessing, probably about 1995, let's say. So I think I started studying Italian maybe about 20 years ago. So maybe
A few years later.
yeah, a few years later.
Yeah.
And the studying Italian was kind of, I think maybe I had just turned 50, and I decided, okay, it's time for me to learn a foreign language. I studied some French in college, and I studied Latin in high school, but I really didn't have a language to use. So I live in Seattle, Washington, and in Seattle, there was, it's no longer in existence, but there's a language academy for adult learners. And I began studying there, and I worked with a really wonderful language teacher, who's Tuscan. And I think the school has closed, but our group has remained together. And we're a very faithful, small group, probably about 6 or 7 of us. So that has given me much more of a foundation in Italian, and then my passion for Rome, which maybe we can talk about, which is kind of the subject of the article I wrote for you. That was deeply rooted, but once I began to know Italian, that interest really grew to maybe an obsession. And so I try to come to Rome every year, and this year I've actually been in Rome twice, so it's great.
So, how was born the idea of this story, L'ultimo giorno?
Okay. Yeah. So the idea for the article that I wrote for you, well, a couple of things. And I talk about some of this in the article. When my wife and I got married in, I think it was 1982, we came to Rome for our honeymoon. So it was my first time. So it was this very romantic, very memorable, very elevated period of our lives. And it was my wife's idea to come to Rome. I had never been here. I was not that interested in it, and now she regrets. Because she goes, no, she's fine with my passion for Rome, but she doesn't share it as much as I do. So, I really didn't have a lot of preconceptions about Rome, but I had studied Latin in high school, and I think that was one of the seeds. I remember in my Latin textbook, there are all of these illustrations of busts of emperors or sarcophagi or the Roman Forum, and I think it was deeply embedded, in my unconscious that Rome was this.
So were you fascinated by the history of the Roman Empire?
Yeah, I wouldn't say fascinated at that period, but interested. So we came here, and I still remember we stayed near the Spanish Steps in Via Sistina in a hotel that was kind of dowdy. Wasn't it? It was fine. It wasn't, but I just thought, wow, this city's incredible. I think the fountains, the obelisks, this public art, the spirit, and of course the history, its depth of history, being in a place that has been continuously inhabited. I think for me was a revelation. I mean, the U.S., yes, obviously the Native Americans have been there for thousands of years too, but you don't get that same sense of the building on top of previous civilizations that you get in Rome. But I also think there's something
Because of the monuments, I guess.
yeah, and it's here you see it. I mean, you walk down the street and you see a Baroque church, or Roman art.
Also because the culture was preserved better, I guess.
Yeah, I think
Because it was the culture of the conqueror and not the...
could be. Yeah, I mean, I sometimes think in a kind of fantastical way well, let's fast forward 1,000 years. What will be left of New York? Maybe New York will be the Rome of 1,000 years from now, where people will come to New York and see the ruins of our civilization, or, see the foundations. Oh, here was the Empire State Building.
It could be.
It could be.
If our worlds manage to survive this.
Yeah, I know. I worry that we're going to destroy every trace of civilization, but maybe, and I think Rome, maybe that's also part of what I love about Rome, is the sense that Rome, the Republic rose and fell, the Empire rose and fell, and the church is, the seat of the church is in Rome. But even though these civilizations have come and gone, governments have come and gone, they're still Rome. Here it is. There's still it, and it's also, I think, it's
what a long history.
It's a long history, but I think for me also part of the appeal is just how beautiful it is. I know everybody does not share my taste for Rome, but I think the light, the colors of the building, the people, the atmosphere, it's a big, exciting city without the without the rudeness. So, it's a passion, it's a love affair. I think any kind of love affair, you can't say exactly why this person became your life partner, or this is your best friend. It's just something that happened. But it's definitely, I've been here many times, as you know, and sometimes I worry, what if I go back to Rome and I'm sick of it, or because I'm bored, or I've seen too many things, or too many visits, but so far it hasn't happened. I wouldn't say never, but it hasn't happened yet.
And you have to, the sentence of Philip the sci-fi writer.
Probably not, but
he said that history ended after the time of the Roman Empire, and now we are living in a hologram or something.
Well, that I've never heard that, but that could be part of my.
Because reading your piece, I had also the sensation that was kind of placed at the end of the world.
There is something that
this feeling.
Yeah, I think you're right. The other thing, Marco, as you know from the piece, is that some of it grew out of a dream that I had. And it wasn't just a dream that I had once, it was a recurring dream. And I talk about it in the article, that I dreamed that
it was a real dream.
Oh yeah, and I still have this dream. In fact, I had it right before I came here. And the dream it always is the same elements, which is, it's my last day in Rome, and I wake up and I go, oh, I've been here only 10 days, whatever, and I haven't seen the Capitol. I haven't been to the Campidoglio. Have to go there, because to me, there's something very magnetic about that place. Something I almost feel a spiritual quality, like it's, whether it's Michelangelo's square or whatever, but
it's probable that they chose that place for
that reason,
for this reason.
Right. It was the kind of most sacred of the seven hills. So in the dream, I go, oh, I have to go there. I can't really consider it a trip to Rome without seeing the Capitol. So I set out, but there's traffic. I can't find it. The geography is different. It's inaccessible. I can't scale the walls. And so somehow it becomes this kind of anxiety dream. And, trying, dodging people, dodging traffic, but I never quite get there. So I've had this dream a number of times. And so I've analyzed why Rome, why the Campidoglio, why. So I think in brief, to me, maybe the meaning of the dream is that the Campidoglio is somehow associated with the idea of meaning itself. Significance is embodied in this space, which has this deep history, this spiritual connection to the Roman religion, and so being unable to attain it, but being close but not really being able to get there, I think to me has taken on this heightened significance. I will interject that I have already been to the Capitol in this visit, so it's done. I don't have to worry about the dream.
I guess also the first time that you visited Rome, probably.
Yes, And the other thing, maybe this is worth mentioning, I'm being a writer, being a person whose imagination is inspired by books. The first time when Kate and I went to Rome for our honeymoon, we had this wonderful guidebook called A Companion's Guide to Rome by Georgina Mason. So if anybody...
This is quoted, no?
It's quoted in my piece, yeah. And she begins the book by saying, your first place that you go in Rome should be the Capitoline, and you should go at dusk. When the sun, right as the sun is going down, the light is beautiful, you'll see all the domes sort of silhouetted against the sky. And she goes on and on about this. So I think the idea was maybe planted by this book. Now, this is something else that I address in the piece a little bit. The whole idea of travel and memory, what we see, what we experience, what we remember. So this was 1982 that we had this experience, so very long time ago. But I still remember reading the book, probably reading the book more as I remember actually being in the Capitoline. And I think that maybe is also part of the dream and part of the essay that I wrote for you, is how to connect with places and what you remember, what you take away, how significance is made in traveling, in friendship, in whatever, in every aspect. So it's pretty wide-ranging. It was a challenge to do it in Italian. I'll say that much.
Yeah, because we didn't say that you wrote it in Italian.
Yeah. And
it was your first article.
It was, and I'm very, very proud of it. It was, as I said, I've been studying Italian for a while, but still, writing in a language that's not your native language is very audacious, very challenging. I'm thinking a little bit of Jimpo Lecfieri, the American writer who's famous for having been really mid-career, and she has a very successful career, moved to Italy and decided to write in Italian. Now, I actually don't particularly, I like her stories written in English. I don't like her Italian books as much. So that was also in the back of my mind, like, maybe my writing, it was, maybe I'm just not up to this. Maybe my writing in Italian will lack character, will lack depth. And maybe it does. I don't know, but I rose to the challenge, and I'm glad I did it. I think it stretched me. In my Italian class now, we're at a level that we're reading Italian literature and discussing it. So I have very good models.
What are your favorite
Italian
writers that you read the Italian?
I'd say Natalia Ginsburg is one of my favorites. Dino Buzzati is somebody else I really like. We're reading his book, Innamorato, now.
Yeah,
it's very good, very powerful. Elsa Morante is another who I really like. Not all of her books. I like Storia. Is it Bob Storia or La Storia?
I think that's La Storia.
La Storia. I really liked. Then we just read one really tough going, Menzogna e Sortilege.
I guess I never read.
Well, it's very long. It's very it kind of moves slowly.
She's a difficult writer for
me. Yeah.
For your readers.
Yeah. I think Natalia Ginsburg is the favorite of a lot of foreign readers because her language is really simple. And
it's more essential.
Yeah. For me, maybe this sounds stupid, but if I can read without a dictionary, I always enjoy the book 10 times more than if I'm looking up a lot of words. So, but one of the few writers whose language is accessible, but I don't really like in Italian, is Alberto Moravia. And I find that Moravia, differenti.
When did you like that?
Because, well, the book I liked least was, which we read recently, Passos Gli Indifferenti. I find the characters are so ugly in their motivation that there is...
Okay, yeah, I know a little bit, so I get that maybe it's not your kind of story, your kind of characters.
But I did read La Romana di Moravia in Italian, and that I like much better. Because I found the the La Romana, the woman at the center of it, the girl at the center of it was very appealing. I really she becomes a prostitute, her life is difficult, she's poor, but she falls in love.
But the approach is different from the
Yeah, it definitely seems to me that people who, if you met them at a party, you would go, oh, what?
But I guess that one was his first book.
I think it was like 23.
So, when you're young, you can be very cynical.
Yes, exactly. So those are some other writers that I like. Oddly, I did read Elena Ferrante in Italian, and her language to me is quite accessible. I'm not a huge fan of her. I mean, I like the language.
Which book?
The quartet, the brilliant French English. The Italian, it's La mia amica geniale.
L'amica geniale.
L'amica geniale. And now,
Actually, I wouldn't say I love Elena Ferrante, but I like very much.
Okay. We have like different taste, I think.
Yeah,
that's fine. So let's see who else.
And you told me, I don't know if you changed your mind, but I guess that you still like
Abate, yes. I very much like Abate. And again, I'll just repeat the story, you know it, but I think it's of interest. My teacher chose 2 of his novels for our class, and at that point, I really didn't know anything about the Abresh and what there was a language, a culture, a sort of group, and come over in like just the 16th century from Albania. When did the Abresh come to?
Yeah, but because it depends from village to village. But mine was the 15th century.
Okay.
And the 15th century.
And that they kept,
back in the 16th.
That they kept their culture intact, kept their language intact. That was fascinating. And for me, one of the high points of my study of Italian was, I can't remember how we put this together, but when you told me, oh, I know about Teo a little bit, we're from the same village, and then you got him, you arranged with him to appear, participate in our custody.
We are not from the same village, but they're both Albrecht.
Okay. So he agreed to participate via Zoom in our class, and it was great. It was very, we all prepared questions, and he's a very warm, very giving person. So yeah, he was another one of my favorites. Buzzati is hard. I think there's something, the sort of explicit sexuality of his books is not, I think, is a little difficult for Americans. It's funny because our class is all old people in our 70s, maybe even 80s. And here we are reading about this prostitute who's naked half the time and having sex with everybody. And it's funny that we're these old people reading about this very racy, very sexualized environment. But we also read Buzzati's, I think in Italian it's called the Libro in Fumetti. It's sort of about one of the first illustrated novels about the Orpheus story.
Yeah.
It's really good. And those are some of the writers, the Italian writers.
I want to ask you something about what Sammy Knew.
Okay.
How you had the idea for it?
Okay.
Because I know that you were planning to write a non-fiction book at the beginning.
Correct.
And then when you started to write a novel, it had a different point of view or different impact.
I'll tell you the story. Yeah, of course. So I actually wrote a nonfiction book about the woman who raised me as a kid. When I was a kid, my parents both worked outside the home. My mother was a doctor, my father was a businessman. And they hired what we would call a nanny now, a babysitter, who lived with us. And she was African-American. I was born on her birthday, so I was her favorite. So we were very close. And
so like the main character in the novel.
Yes. Yeah. So she died when I was 10. She died in 1963, so a long, long time ago. But I never forgot her, and I never forgot some of the things she told me. Anyway, long story. At some point after writing the book about my own family, I became fascinated by her, and I began to research her family. and I found her Social Security application, which led me to her parents. I was able to trace her lineage 2 generations back into slavery. I remember she told me that her grandparents were slaves, and I was able to find a record of them, their enslavement. So I wrote a book about her, about my search for her, about my
But you didn't have so many information.
No,
But yeah,
the information was pretty thin. I never found any letters. I never found any direct descendants of her. She did have one son, but he died. So it was a little thin on the
latest sources that normally someone can have
correct.
were not accessible.
Not accessible. Nonetheless, I wrote the book, and it was not published. So for various reasons, but my editor decided she didn't want to publish it. So that was a blow. But I thought,
Because it was the first time that happened to you.
yeah. And there's actually, it's like, well, no, I'm not the one that gets rejected. But it happened, and I got over it. But I thought, I'm not done with this story. This is a really good story. Ethel is too important. Your name was Ethel. Ethel was too important to me to just let this go. So that was when I thought, okay, maybe I'll try this as fiction instead of nonfiction. And that was the genesis of what Sammy Knew. I changed, as you know, because you're reading the book, I changed a lot. In the book, the character, Sammy is the character based on me. Not, we have some things in common, other things not. But Ethel, as I said, died when I was 10. But in the book, I made Sammy, he's in his last year of high school.
So it's 17, 18 years old.
Wait, he's 17 or 18. Ethel,
She's still alive.
Still alive. I changed her name to Tutu, which is what we called Ethel. That was my name for her. And I also...
And then the grandson,
the grandson, Leon, right, was made up out of whole lot. She didn't have a grandson at all. So there were elements that were true, elements that were fictionalized, elements that were completely made up. But one thing that I really needed to do from my own point of view was to shift the period from 1963 to 1970. And the reason I did that is that was a period of great social unrest in the U.S. and the period in which the Black Panthers, the sort of African-American political party, was ascendant, had a lot of power, a lot of attention. In many ways,
the contemporary political situation
right,
was a factor in choosing so
absolutely. The political situation was explosive, and it was a time when people's lives could change overnight. I mean, people would start college, conservative, traditional, and then just throw it all away and become a revolutionary. There was a lot going on and a lot of parallels to today. I think Black Lives Matter.
This was something that I noticed. You can see that it's set in the 70s because a lot of things are different, and you can really link the atmosphere of the 70s. But at the same time, you can realize immediately that he's speaking about the present,
right?
About the right now, and he's giving us like a different point of view. It's like farther from the normal point of view that we have at the moment, but at the same time it's kind of deeper,
right?
Because from far you can see better something.
Exactly. And that was very deliberate on my part, that I wanted this to be a book set in 1970, but told through the lens of 2020, where we see the world that we live in kind of mapped to the past. So, and the big question for me was, well, can I switch to fiction? Can I stop writing? Because so nonfiction, the books that I wrote were heavily researched. And in some ways, the richness of those books was rooted in the research. So if I found more archival information or a diary or a series of letters, like the book The Family that you mentioned that I wrote about my family, I found a trove of letters, hundreds of letters that were written by my relatives in Belarus Lithuania that really enriched the book. But in fiction, you make it a lot.
Yeah, I guess the process is
very different. And I just didn't know whether I could do it. And my agent, who has since died but was very active when I started writing Sammy, said, I've had other clients who have tried to switch from nonfiction to fiction, and they have not been able to do it. So she was not encouraging. But
I mean, it's not for everyone.
It's not
be able to both.
Yeah.
Maybe someone can be the greatest writer in non-fiction, not be able to the opposite.
Yeah, it's true. So writing is writing in some ways, but the scenes are different. I mean, the pacing, the motivation, it's a different mindset. It's not entirely different because I feel that the nonfiction writing that I do, I want the language to be poetic. I want the language to be rhythmic and engaging. And those are qualities that I try to maintain in fiction as well. But I mean, here's an example. This is obvious, but it's worth pointing out. In fiction, everything has to be there for a reason. If the book I'm working now, I have a father give his son a toy soldier, and because he's been away, and is this a new book? Yeah,
a novel or
no, another?
Okay, so
so I'm sticking with fiction. But so I thought, okay, well, I thought this is a charming detail. It might be something that a father would buy for his son when he's away. But then I thought, if I put it in there, it has to have some use beyond just being a charming detail. It has to come back. I mean, the famous quote of Chekhov's, and I can't remember exactly, but he's like, if there's a gun in Act 1, it has to go off by Act 3. So there has to be, and so, I think choosing the details and then writing the scenes. Well, here's another example. I find in fiction, there's no such thing as a character who's just there to advance the plot. Every character has to be fully developed, because if you're going to have somebody speak, if you're going to include dialogue, you have to know who the person is, how they're going to talk, whether they're going to use slang, whether they're going to have a sort of high register. So
otherwise it sounds like a fake.
Exactly. So fiction requires you have to create an entire world out of your own head. Now, some of it is, in my case, the novel I'm writing now is also historical, like Sammy. I mean, Sammy was set in 1970. The book I'm writing now starts in 1929 and goes up to the 1980s. So it's not deep history, but it nonetheless is the past. So, it's been a challenge, but it's easier the second time. In a way, what's harder is the novel I'm working now is much long.
The last question about it's a little bit provocative. So, the story that you wrote in this novel, do you think that the publisher would have accepted the proposal right now?
For Sammy?
Yeah, I'm asking because, the main characters are Jews, and the people who do bad things are Jews.
Right, yeah.
And there is the Black Panther that are at least terrorists for some.
That's a good question. I don't know. It's a good question.
Since it's such a sensible...
it's a very sensitive subject now. Yeah. The problem when Sammy was published had nothing to do with Jewish characters. I myself am Jewish. And it's part of the book, but it's not I don't really
I share this idea. It's just that
it's just that
it could have been from any
so the problem when I wrote it was not Judaism. The problem was having a white man tell the story of a black woman. And publishers thought, that's cultural appropriation, you don't have a right to tell that story, etc. And the book
there is a quote in the novel when you say something similar, a character that says
I do. I really
You are stealing the development.
exactly. I'm glad you noticed that. I put that in deliberately because that was something that was very much in the air then. And the publisher and we hired 3 different readers who were African American to read the book to make sure it wasn't offensive in any way. You know, I thought that was too much, and I thought it was a little bit of a constriction on my own.
But I guess 2020, 2021 was the year when this thing was very, very, I don't know, strong.
Yeah.
So with now already starting to be a little bit
Right.
more relaxed about this theme of appropriation.
About that part, yeah. But now I think there's a lot of hostility I've heard among New York editors against anything that's pro-Israel. I think the pro-Palestine faction is very strong in publishing in the States. Yeah,
I hadn't thought that a lot of it was the opposite.
no. And so I think the sort of left in the States is very opposed to what Israel is doing in Gaza and now in Lebanon. So it's become very controversial. I think for Jews, I think there are a lot of American Jews like me who are very proud of our heritage, but are very unhappy with Israeli politics. But it's very hard to criticize Israel without sounding anti-Semitic.
Yeah, and so also because everything that you say, they're gonna say the truth. So you're gonna even start the
correct. So it's a bit. I think it's in some ways it's a form of censorship on both sides, both the critics of Israel and the proponents of Israel. And it's just very difficult to talk about this. And I think as a Jew, I'm very sensitive to anti-Semitism. I don't want to seem like I'm joining that party. So I think if you say, ceasefire in Gaza, that sounds innocent on the face of it. That sounds like a good thing. But I think a lot of pro-Israeli Jews would say to me, how dare you as a Jew call for a ceasefire? That is going to undermine Israel. So it's become I don't know what it's like in Italy, but in the States, it's become very fraught and it's very good.
I don't know. Also, here situation, all the politicians are with Israel. In culture, there are some people that are sided more with the Palestinian, or at least they want to start a dialogue.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But it's very controversial. I mean, you cannot write anything against Israel.
Right.
I guess it is. It's gonna be a little bit difficult, and then you are labeled as an anti-Semite.
Right.
You said.
So in the States, I think there's that faction, but there's also I think that a lot of people don't want to hear anything pro-Israel because there's a lot of sympathy for the Palestinian people. And, as we all know, after the attacks of October 2023, when the college, a lot of prestigious colleges in the U.S. began to launch pro-Palestinian demonstrations and occupations, I understood where they were coming from, but I found it very frightening. And it was interesting because the novel Sammy is set in the 1970s, in which there was student uprising, protests, bombings.
They talked about Palestine and
right, and that Israel too, right, a little bit. So, it's a difficult situation. I understand the Israelis' shock at the attacks of Hamas, but I think what they've done in Gaza is unforgivable. So it's really
I think the situation, we should start to be allowed to talk more about things. That is the only way that you can figure out.
Absolutely.
And also, one thing that I find here, the people that want peace everywhere are labeled as terrorists.
Yeah, that's right.
No, it seems the George Orwell novel when everything is called with the opposite name.
Yes,
I mean, being allowed to talk and
No, I agree. So, but I also understand where that is coming from because the memory of the Holocaust is very strong. Now there's Holocaust deniers. And I think the fear of another outbreak of anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish violence is real. And I think any Jew who is aware of their history has that concern. So I think that it is fed the fires of this.
I guess we could talk
Yeah.
a lot about this.
Yeah.
It's a sensitive subject, but
It is. Yeah. I'm glad we talked about it because, as you said, to not touch on it, to feel that you can't because you're going to step on somebody's toes, I think is a form of censorship. But I also, I do worry about going public with any critique of Israel because I think I would be seen. It could be taken out of context.
Also, if it's functional, it's not gonna get any result. It is a method to don't talk publicly for on it. Yes. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Marco. That was great.
For being the first writer.
My pleasure.